everyone, and welcome to the Housing Equity Assessment Tool informational video. My name is Danica, and I work with Neighbor Impact. So I'm just going to start with some background information regarding the HEAT assessment. So the HEAT assessment was adopted by the HLC board. It is meant to more accurately reflect an individual's vulnerability through a more holistic and equitable approach. So unlike with that SPDAT assessment, the HEAT assessment was implemented with the intent to not have a threshold. And what that means is, with that SPDAT assessment, there was this threshold, meaning individuals only qualified for certain programs based solely on their scores. So by eliminating that threshold, we are saying that these scores, these vulnerability scores, should be looked at as simply a part of someone's story instead of as the whole, and that that vulnerability score shouldn't be the base determining factor for program eligibility. Alright, and then I want to go over some quick trauma-informed practices as well as this opening script. So when you're going through and you're conducting this assessment, it's really important that you're not re-asking questions that you already know the answer to. So oftentimes when you're going through this assessment, you may already have a working relationship with a client, and you may already know the answer to a lot of these questions. So I really recommend, if you've never done this assessment before, if you've only conducted a few, I really recommend taking the time to just look over this assessment and understand what each question is asking. And then when you're going through it with somebody, just be aware of that knowledge that you already have on hand. So for instance, like with demographic information, you may have already collected this information from an individual recently, and in that case you're not going to have to re-ask those questions. So just being aware of that, especially those questions that are more personal in nature, if someone's already disclosed that answer to you, just be aware and try your best not to re-ask those questions. Okay, and so with this opening script, you're going to want to highlight each of these bullet points here. So your name, your organization, your role there. This is really only applicable if you're conducting an assessment with an individual that you don't really have that working relationship with. Then you're going to want to go over this information. But again, a lot of the times, you probably have that working relationship and they already know this. So this is more applicable, say, if you're staffing the hotline or if you haven't really worked with an individual before. Okay, and then you're going to want to go over why exactly you are doing this assessment and what the client will get out of completing it. So I recommend taking some time to really explain what the coordinated entry system is with someone and the purpose of why they are completing this housing equity assessment tool. And then you're going to want to let them know that the survey should take less than 15 minutes. For what I recommend is I say about 15 to 30 minutes just to be on that safe side, because you may need to be completing these supplemental surveys. It may take some time, so I say about roughly 15 to 30 minutes typically. Okay. And then you're going to want to make sure that the client knows that only yes, no, or one-word answers are being sought. So if someone doesn't know that and they don't know exactly what answers are being sought from an assessment, then they may feel that they have to share more than they're comfortable with, and we certainly don't want that to be the case, so it's really important that you emphasize that as well. And any question can be skipped or refused. And then you're going to want to make sure that they know that this information will be shared and stored within their coordinated entry files. So again, when you're completing coordinated entry assessments, you're really going to want to make sure that you have that release of information on file and in HMIS before you go ahead and conduct this HEAT assessment. Okay. And if someone does not understand a question, they can ask you for clarification. So that's why I really recommend taking the time to go through this assessment, familiarize yourself with these questions, and really have an internal understanding of what is being asked. And that way, if someone does have a question, you're able to provide that clarification for them. And lastly, it's very important to remind participants that sharing honestly and openly about what they are going through will not keep them out of services, and it will instead help us better connect them to the services that they need and or want. Okay, so once you go through that opening script with an individual, then you're just going to want to get their consent to participate. So I usually go through this opening script, and then I ask them if they have any questions before we begin the assessment, and then you'll want to say, do I have your consent to participate in this housing equity assessment tool? So once you get that consent, then you can go ahead and click that. Okay, and then you're good to begin. this assessment. So again, you may already have a lot of this information, so just make sure you're not re-asking that, but you're going to go through question by question and make sure that you're answering all these questions. So what I'm going to show you right now is just what it's going to look like if each question is filled out for a section. Okay, so you'll see there's a score of 5 here. So you'll see that once you go through section by section with an individual, then that score is going to populate at the bottom of that section. Alright, and then once you've gone through each section of the basic assessment with an individual, so once you get to the end of this, end of 61, question 61, then you will have completed that basic assessment. So I recommend once you've done that, you're going to go over, just make sure all those questions have been answered properly, and then what you're going to do is go ahead and see if a supplemental assessment needs to be completed. So, there's a couple of questions that, depending upon an individual's answer, you may need to complete a supplemental assessment with them. So right here you can see it says if they are an adult with dependents under age 18, you're going to want to complete that family supplemental assessment. And then here, number 2, if they answer yes to number 2, then you're going to want to be making sure that you complete that GNC and LGBTQ supplemental assessment. And same with 3. So if they answer yes to either 2 or 3, then you will be completing that supplemental assessment. And then also 11 and 12. And you'll see that there's instructions right here that'll tell you whether or not you need to be completing the supplemental assessment based upon their answer. And the last one we have down here is number 55. Okay, so what I do is, I go through that basic assessment, and then I look through, make sure all those questions have been answered, and then I check these ones specifically, so 55, 12, 11, 3, 2, and this one right here, and I check their answers to see if any supplemental assessments need to be completed. So what I do is I go ahead and I highlight those questions, and that serves as a reminder that I need to be making sure and following up after I complete the basic assessment. That's a process that works for me. If you have some sort of other process that works for you, that's great. Just anything that makes sure that you are going ahead and completing those surveys that need to be completed. And as you'll see with these supplemental surveys, it's the same concept here, so seeking yes or no answers. And as you'll see, once you go through and you complete that, then a score will populate for you at the bottom here. So you're just going to want to go through, once all of those have been completed, you're going to want to go through and just make sure that they're matching up correctly here. I also recommend just looking over these scoring sheets as well, and just kind of cross-referencing just to make sure that everything is showing up correctly as well. Okay. And then, so once that is all completed, then the score for the assessment, the basic assessment, and the score for the supplemental scores will be added together to get that overall heat score right here. Alrighty, and then after you have completed this assessment, after you've gone through every single question and made sure that they've all been completed, and that you've also gone through and ensured that any supplemental assessments that needed to be completed were completed as well, then you're going to want to go over that closing script with an individual. So with that closing script, you're going to want to emphasize a few things. So you're going to want to make sure that the individual is aware of the importance of staying in touch with providers and keeping their contact information up to date within their coordinated entry. So this is a really, really important one that you're going to want to emphasize. So you're going to want to make sure that clients are aware that they will need to reach back out to the provider that they are working with, or whoever conducted the assessment. They're going to want to reach back out if their information changes. So if their contact information changes, if their living situation changes, we want to make sure that that information is up to date within their coordinated entry file. So you're going to want to take the time to really emphasize that importance that if their contact information changes, if their living situation changes, then they're going to want to reach back out. And it is up to the provider, once you are aware that someone has updated information, it is up to you to then go ahead and update that within the system to make sure that we have that up-to-date information. And this is really important because that contact information is used if an individual gets selected for a housing opportunity. That is used to reach out to them. And then you're also going to want to make sure that you emphasize the importance of exploring other housing options outside of coordinated entry. So unfortunately, when a coordinated entry assessment is completed and a housing equity assessment tool is completed, it's not a guarantee that someone will be selected or be able to get into permanent housing. So you're going to want to make sure that you emphasize the importance of exploring other resources outside of coordinated entry. And then you're also going to want to make sure that you explain the importance of having documentation ready, because if an individual is selected for a housing opportunity, then they will need certain documentation in order to get into housing. So you're going to want to make sure that they understand the importance of having those essential documents ready. And if they don't have essential documents, I recommend connecting them to resources that are able to help them obtain those documents. All right. And then lastly, I also want to emphasize that when you're completing this housing equity assessment tool, it is recommended that you complete this assessment for all adults in a household. So if you're working with a multiple adult household, it's recommended that each adult in that household takes the housing equity assessment tool. Now keep in mind that while this is recommended, you always want to make sure that you are honoring someone's wishes and preferences. And if they do not want to take that assessment, that is completely okay. But it is recommended that all adults take the assessment. All right, and that is it for this housing equity assessment tool informational video. Thanks for watching.